Hey, Clemson family, the ACC did expand on Friday, as was expected. It certainly wasn't a secret the way the SEC or the Big Ten shocked people with their expansions of late. Cal, Stanford, and Southern Methodist University will be joining the Atlantic Coast Conference.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Is it the All Coast Conference now? Is it the Any Coast Conference? It certainly has a different feel to it. And I think you and I kind of agree that they could have been even more radical and gone even further than they did if they had wanted to. But it certainly is going to be a new look conference coming up next summer.
Feels like they should name it the Gap Conference, right? They fill the gap, but they've got the Gulf, the Atlantic, and the Pacific all covered. I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. This is season two. Two college football Saturdays have passed. Clemson's still undefeated,
I
unless
like
you
it.
count the fact that they voted against this expansion and it happened anyway. The reasons obviously are financial. They are about the rest of the conference. They are not about taking the wishes of some of the biggest programs in the conference into account. Let's get into it. First of all, the timeline was very stretched out. Uh, Obviously, there were some reasons at the end there that it dragged on a couple days more than we thought, and justifiably so. A fatal shooting on campus in North Carolina, thinking about them, a hurricane hitting North Florida, thinking about all the people affected by that as well. This did still go through, and it's all about finances for the conference overall. And we don't know where the money's going to go. We just know it's going to generate more money.
Yeah, it's going to generate more money. SMU is going to take nothing for 9 years of the TV money, right? They'll still get playoff money. They'll still get NCAA tournament money. They'll get baseball tournament money, all that stuff. They'll still get part of that. Uh, Stanford and Cal are going to take a reduced rate. Look, it makes sense for the ACC. I know that there are people out there and says, how does this make sense? I get it. I agree geography wise, football wise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Stanford and Cal don't bring a lot of football. I think SMU does. I think SMU brings some football panache. They want to be good in football. They used to be good in football when you and I were growing up. We know why they were, but they were. And everybody else in that conference was doing the same thing. And they
Which
made
is okay now.
it is okay now. And they made an example of SMU because SMU wasn't Oklahoma and Texas and these other and these other teams in that area, not same conference, but in that region. But but it makes sense for the ACC because they need teams. We talked about this when we've discussed this before here on the podcast. This round of realignment is about the number of teams. You've seen the Big Ten get to 18. The Big 12 now has 16. I tweeted out, if that can be true and the math doesn't count and the SEC can reach into Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri and Arkansas, those schools aren't in the Southeast. They're in the South, but they're not in the Southeast. Then the ACC can go wherever it needs to go. And that's exactly what this is about, is getting enough teams to survive. Now, how does it impact Clemson? You said it there. Clemson didn't vote for this. I think that's pretty clear. Sounds like Florida State, North Carolina were the other two dissenting votes. Those schools make sense too. That's okay. They're looking out for themselves. I as an alum of Clemson, I wouldn't want the Clemson leadership to vote for something that they don't think is good for Clemson. It is. I think it is good for the school for the reason. I mean, for the conference reason we just talked about, but it's not in Clemson's best interest to do this as far as just adding these schools, unless somehow this helps Clemson get out of the conference whenever that happens. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how that can be the case, but smarter people than me will decide that. But I think as far as if you are a fan at Wake and Syracuse and Boston College and whoever, Louisville, Georgia Tech, name them. It makes sense because you're trying to survive. And even it sounded like NC State was the school that flipped and kind of broke away from North Carolina. I think it makes sense for NC State because who's going to want NC State if Clemson and Florida State leave? Where's NC State going to go? They kind of need to backfill, Bill, the way the Big 12 backfilled, right? I mean, Oklahoma and Texas left, and the Big 12 got really aggressive and backfilled. Did it backfill with a team like Oklahoma and Texas? No, but it backfilled with a bunch of schools that have quality athletics, and everybody now thinks the Big 12 is safe for whatever the next round of this is going to be. So I think that's what the ACC is trying to do. And then another point, and I'll shut up because I know you want to talk, is I think, and you mentioned this on the last episode that we talked about this, and this was a great point, getting the ACC network in Northern California and in Texas. That's a big part of this as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm learning the more I read about it, even just being inside the state lines, so anywhere in California would have been good. Yep. There are more schools out west they could add. Frankly, probably the best school that could be added at anywhere is USF. And if the ACC feels like it's at risk of losing Florida State and or Miami, that is a natural school to go and target. Probably could target another school or two or three in Texas as well. You mentioned Oregon State, Washington State. I think DJU is putting on a pretty good passing clinic for Oregon State as we speak right now on Sunday night. We'll see how they continue to grow the ACC, if they continue to grow. I have thought all along, and frankly, I thought it about the Big Ten, that they should add more teams out west, not just 2 or 4, but get it to 6 or 7 or 8. Give them sort of a division of their own out west where they can minimize their travel, where the schools that are east of the Mississippi or in the Mississippi Valley wouldn't have to go all the way out there all that often. Some interesting thoughts in the ACC now with the 3 new members, that maybe there's some place in Dallas where they could all kind of meet halfway for some athletic events. I don't know what kind of attendance you're going to get there, but if you feel like you can make that happen, especially if it's made for TV type events, if you're more concerned about the television revenue than the gate revenue and the concessions revenue and all those things, well then, go for it. Explore those ideas, see if they can make sense of the bottom line. This is only about the bottom line, though. Let's be real. This is not about building a strong bunch of rivalries, right? Like Clemson played Cal when you and I were in school, lost. I think the score was 37-13 that year. Brenson Buckner got ejected for punching the Cal quarterback, Mike Pulaski, in what one reporter called the, quote, most sensitive of regions. And that will get you ejected from just about any athletic event. Really not a lot of Clemson SMU history there, not a lot of Clemson Stanford history. Look, Stanford has had some good years in football. I'm not going to write them off. Cal, a little less often, but every now and then they rise up when they have the right coach and they land the right recruits who are compatible with what that coach wants to do. But you just don't look at this and go, oh yeah, they belong in the ACC. So let's spin it forward. Can the ACC get more schools from out west and continue to build? And was this really kind of preventive, as some people have speculated or opined, that this is just the ACC making sure that if Clemson and Florida State and others do depart the conference, that you're not going to get below that minimum threshold that you need to get the payouts that the conference is currently getting, because they really are neck and neck with the Big 12 right now as far as media payout every year. I think the ACC is actually turning out to be a little bit behind the Big 12 right now with the new deal that Brett Yormark negotiated for his conference out there. Not markedly, though, not like the ACC is lagging the SEC and the Big Ten. This isn't going to solve that revenue gap by itself, but if there is going to be some unequal revenue sharing, it can get the Clemson, Florida State type programs that are going to make money off of a football playoff, or schools like North Carolina, potentially Florida State, Miami, Duke, who can make money off of a basketball playoff payout. I sure don't expect Clemson to be making a whole lot of money in the basketball playoff anytime soon, unfortunately.
Don't set me off on that tangent. I'm going to stay away from that.
Prove me wrong, fellas. I'd love it. I'm always rooting for you. I'm never rooting against you. But objectively, I don't see that happening soon. Then that gap can be narrowed to where it's not completely dysfunctional. It's still a gap to be narrowed, though, and this is not going to do it in and of itself. So how do you continue to make this part of a solution that can in the end make Clemson and Florida State happy, even though they oppose this.
Couple of points here. You said, could they get more schools? I think they could, right? I absolutely think they could if they wanted to. It depends on who it is. Now, obviously, they could get Wazoo and Oregon State right now, because those
I'm not so
schools,
sure. You and I
don't think
texted
so?
about that. Well, Cal, Stanford, SMU, they have the deep pockets to take reduced or no payouts for an extended period of time. And I'm not sure Oregon State and Washington State have those kind of pockets. I might be wrong.
but that's going to give them more than they would still get more from the ACC than if they go to a G5 conference.
Sure.
Because
and I think that's what's at play with SMU, right?
Right.
Like SMU doesn't feel like they have to raise 40 million a year.
No,
they feel like
don't.
they have to replace, what was it that they were making, 8 or 12?
Yeah,
or,
what's worse than that? I mean, as
Yeah.
long as they're making 12, they're not off any worse off, because eventually they're going to get that extra money back, whenever that happens. But like, right, Wazoo, the thing about Stanford is that was made clear was their athletes, like, people, we've talked about this isn't good for the student athletes. Their athletes wanted this because at least now they're still competing at the highest level.
Yeah.
And if you're a volleyball player or a softball player or whatever, women's basketball at Stanford, do you want to be in the Mountain West, or do you want to be in the ACC where you are soccer? I mean, all those sports that Stanford is so good at. If you drop down to a G5, you're not going to be able to recruit the same kind of athletes. That's why Stanford was so desperate to do this, because of all these other sports where they win national titles.
Yeah.
But I think that the ACC could be more aggressive. You know how I feel like that. I don't think they've been aggressive enough. They could have gone and gotten Oregon and Washington before they jumped to the Big Ten if they would have been more aggressive. But I'm like, remember the old line in the Michael Keaton Batman movie, and I tweeted this out. Let's get nuts. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. I would go get Boise. I would go get Fresno. I would go get San Diego State.
Yes.
And create and then I would go get Wazoo and Oregon State too. I would go get those 5 schools. Then you've got Stanford and Cal. There's 6. And you've got SMU, kind of. There's 7. And there's a Midwest Western wing that helps you cut down on all this travel. And come on, we all know that the quote unquote academic part of this is just a front. And how many times have we heard since Friday, when this became official Friday morning, oh, well, that's such a good academic institution, that's going to help the ACC.
Yeah.
Now, okay. I mean, you can say that, but it's not true. It doesn't change anything for Clemson that Stanford's a great academic school, and it is. It doesn't change anything for NC State, and NC State's a good academic school. I'm not saying that they're not, but if that's the goal, then Duke and Wake and Georgia Tech and Miami, the smaller private schools, and Georgia Tech's not private, but you know what I'm saying, the quote unquote academics, UVA, those schools would just go create their own conference. That's not what this is about. It's what Randy Moss say? Straight cash, homie. That's what this is about. And look, I'm telling you, I would, if you're going to do this, then do it and go get those other schools that I mentioned. And I threw Hawaii in my tweet just because I want to go to Hawaii sometime to go to a game. But I'm serious. San Diego State is great at basketball. They have committed to football and trying to be a Power 5 team. We've seen the stadium they've built. Fresno State's had a good run in football. They're good in other sports.
Yeah.
Boise, we know what Boise is. If you give Boise that kind of Power 5 money, they're going to continue to be what they've been. And then Oregon State and Washington State have had good runs as well. So I would absolutely go add those other 5 schools and have a group of 8 out there that you could really kind of live with.
Yeah. And one other I keep thinking about, and I know they're not really all that competitive in most sports right now, but a growth market, UNLV. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
That is absolutely a growth market. A lot of things happening there.
Put the ACC network in Las Vegas. Are you kidding me? Absolutely.
you know. So there are schools out there who can, be spoken with and track them down and say, look, how do you feel about this? Because now you've got 6 schools solid who are truly transcontinental at this point, right? Like, you've got the 4 who have gone to the Big Ten from the Pac-12, looking at trips to Maryland and Rutgers and Penn State. You've
Right.
got the 2 now who joined the ACC, looking at trips to Syracuse and Boston College and Virginia. So,
And,
you
and
know,
and you might as well mention Arizona going to West Virginia. I mean, yeah, I
mhm,
mean all those schools are, it's the same thing. Absolutely
yeah.
the same thing.
So look, put a study hall on the plane, and make sure that time gets put to good use, right? Don't make it all about looking through the playbook, looking through the tape. It's tough to sleep on a plane as it is. So help. Seriously, I'm being serious about that. Take
Yeah.
tutors if students are going to be studying out there, not just focusing on athletics the entire trip. Make those people available to them, right?
Well, you're
And
getting
and
this money, you might as well spend it
yeah,
on the student athletes, right? And,
yep,
and I and I
absolutely,
do I do think that the Stanford, to me, the Stanford deal is a really good point, because a lot of older people like me have said, "How is this good for the student athletes?" And I had not, absolutely had not thought about, well, if I want to go to Stanford and compete for championships, can I do that if I'm in the Mountain West?
right.
And you probably can't. And that's why Stanford was so desperate to make this happen.
There you go. I feel like this is dying down for a while now. Like this was kind of like the last domino in this tumble, right? But do you see anything else out there that's really cooking? I think it's going to be a while until we hear from any school actually reaching a deal to leave the ACC. And I'm not sure that the ACC is truly going to add anyone before that happens either.
Yeah, I don't think the ACC. Look, I want the ACC to add those teams. I don't think it's going to happen. I think
Yeah.
it would be smart for them to add those teams. I think the ACC needs to have the Big 12 mentality and be more aggressive. But I don't think the ACC has been reactive to all of this. Even this is reactive.
Oh, for sure.
It's not reactive to anybody leaving, but it's reactive to, oh my God, we better get some more schools or we're going under. And I think that's 100% what they should have been, Big 12 aggressive instead of reactive. Look, we're going to say this. I don't know when this is going to publish, and we're going to jinx it. And Clemson and Florida State are going to announce tomorrow that they're leaving the ACC. I don't believe that's the case, but boy, there's a lot of buzz out there that Clemson and Florida State will announce something. And buzz is buzz, and rumors are rumors. All that
Yeah.
is true. We know that, but I feel like, yes, it should be, take a breath, right? Until next summer.
Yeah.
When these schools join, when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC, when the 4 join the Big Ten, and we get the 12-team playoff, we don't know what all that's going to happen the same time.
Yeah.
So we don't know what any of that means. So it feels like we are at a kind of a, not a stop, but at a, kind of a 4-way. We're not at a red light. We're at a 4-way stop, and there's 4 people that pulled up at the same time, and we're trying to figure out who goes next. And well, you were here first, or I was here first, or I'm on the right, and we've got to figure out who it is. But I do think the next domino is Clemson and Florida State. I absolutely believe that, unless somehow, some way, this is what Notre Dame wants to happen, and it helps them join the ACC for football. I think, and I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that's ever going to happen. I absolutely believe the next step is Clemson and Florida State going somewhere, and it may be Clemson and somebody going to the Big Ten, or Clemson and Florida State going to the SEC, or Florida State going to the SEC with somebody, whatever it is. I think that's the next step.
Yep. I do think they will, as a good friend of mine has a podcast named Press Pause. I do think they're going to press pause for a while on all of this, at least until after March Madness. And then I think you'll see some of the rumor mill start to heat up again. And frankly, I think that serves Clemson well. I don't know how much homework Florida State is going to do because they seem to be more interested in saying a lot of things externally to please their fan base who wants to see Florida State move to a bigger conference. I think Clemson is being a little more studious about this, and frankly, uh, taking 6 months, 7 months, 8 months to really look at how the money's going to shake out and where it's going to go. And again, keeping in mind that everyone sees the length of the deal for the ACC with ESPN as a handcuff through the mid 2030s.
Yeah.
But other deals are going to come up halfway through that. And are they going to be more money? Really? Did the SEC and the Big Ten sort of get the last two big cash grabs? Because that's the whole reason the Pac-12
Absolutely.
is now the Pac-2, is there just wasn't as much TV money to go around anymore. As I've said before, we're seeing it affect professional sports as well with the Bally and Diamond broadcasts, bankruptcies with some teams not even being carried, or at least one team not even being carried on that network anymore. Major League Baseball had to change the distribution of those games. Other Bally networks are continuing to broadcast most of their teams. The economics of broadcast and telecast are absolutely changing. And if this narrows that gap to where, hey, this is now only losing for 6 years or 5 years, and then it comes back even closer down the road, does it end up being smarter over the long haul to stay put, or do you want to go into another big conference? And I think those are the things that it's so far down the road, and with so little access to the facts in front of us, all we can do is ask that question and wait to see an answer unfold. I don't think that's really the plan, is to just wait this out. Clearly, it's not Florida State's plan at the very least.
No.
Clemson and North Carolina staying quieter, a little harder to read. But if they can keep inching up and inching up and inching up, getting that unequal revenue distribution and continuing to excel on the field and on the court and earn more of that unequal revenue distribution, it may be doable to stay longer, to get closer to that end of the grant of rights, and then be able to buy it out for less money and to tread water for less time. But doing what Cal and Stanford and SMU are doing, I really don't think is an option for Clemson with its student body size and alumni base size, or for Florida State, which has not had the most financially plush athletic department for a long, long time. It seems to be digging out of that to some extent in recent years, but it's not like they have a huge endowment that they can just lean on until the mid 2030s. So a lot of unknowns from here on out.
There are, and you mentioned Clemson's size and fan base and money. I mean, Clemson's not poor by any means, and
Right.
a lot of that you can thank Dabo Swinney for. I mean, I always joke that he was printing money there for a few years, and I think they still are. But look at Miami. I mean, Maryland. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. Look at Maryland. Maryland did that deal with
Mm-hmm.
the reduced money, and it still hasn't climbed out of it athletically, financially. It's just now starting to get, back into full status recently, the last year or two, that it's gotten into full status. I don't think Clemson can do what SMU did. I don't think Clemson can do what Stanford, Cal are doing. I don't think you want to do that. I think that was a desperation move. I don't feel like Clemson is desperate to leave the ACC. Now, some people might be for Clemson to get out, but I don't think Clemson is not going to be able to compete if it stays in the ACC. Stanford and Cal weren't going to be able to compete at the level that they compete at in other sports if they stayed or dropped down to a G5. I don't think Clemson's in any danger of dropping to a G5, and I don't think it's in any danger of not competing. It's do you want or need? And look, I grew up in the ACC region. I grew up, the old cliche of, oh, your teacher wheeled in the TV in class during the ACC tournament and let you watch it. I did that. That happened. So I would, if you said, Daniel, what's your preference? My preference would be, and I know I'm in the minority here, stay in a viable ACC. But how long is the ACC going to be viable? That's the key. And do you get to that point where you say, okay, we have to move at this point, or like you said, wait it out 5-6 years, and then you can afford to say, yeah, this isn't working for us. We're getting out and we're going X or we're going Y, and they want you. I don't think the SEC wants to add anybody right now.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't. I absolutely don't. And I don't think if the SEC adds anybody else right now, I think it's going to be to keep the Big Ten from adding anybody in this part of the country. I really believe that.
Yeah. And it may backfire on them if they don't start adding people, because if the Big Ten does keep expanding, the Southeast is the next place to go to get into that market. Frankly, I think the bottom of the Big Ten has more beatable teams than the SEC has. And I think there's, for a perennial contender like Clemson or like Florida State used to be and is trying to be once again, and might be jumping back into that territory this season with the lineup and the roster that they have got. From path of least resistance competition wise, I think the Big Ten is the easier path out of the two. And financially, it adds more for the Big Ten to do that from their side of things than it adds for the SEC. I mean, North Carolina would be the one that would add a new market really for them, arguably. Gets them into some state lines that they're not currently in, that the Gamecocks don't get them into. That team down I-26, sorry, apologize. It'll be interesting to see if the SEC will expand. Where will it expand? How will it expand? And will the Big Ten continue to be more proactive? So we'll see how it goes. Speaking of Florida State, that game's about to start. As we are doing this, I'll hopefully get this posted while I'm keeping an eye on that and enjoying rooting for another set of Tigers, admittedly. Probably not the thing I should say too often, right? But it's Florida State. What can I do? So.
You live in Florida. You can't cheer for Florida State, right?
Absolutely. It just doesn't work. So we will come at you as soon as we can after Monday night's game, Clemson against Duke. Like you said, the quiet off season. It's also been quiet today on the eve of the game, and that's just how you want to see it. You want to see this team be ready to go. No last minute changes, hopefully. And really looking forward to seeing the Tigers go out and put up a big fight against the Duke Blue Devils, a re-energized program that has a lot going for it, hopefully just not ready to take that next step of beating one of the perennial playoff teams and contenders in the Clemson Tigers. So until we talk to you after the game, and hopefully we'll all be in a good mood after that, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.